How's it going? Welcome back to the channel. Today I want to do a spotlight video on one of the latest decks to come out in YuGiOhTCG, which is Odion, or Temple of the Kings as it's known. I wanted to sort of analyse this deck, do a summary, talk about the deck, what it's trying to do, the pros, cons, and talk about its position in the March format. We are due a ban list at any moment now in the TCG, but I wanted to sort of talk about this deck because I don't think anything would change other than the decks around it. So yeah, really cool deck. It's based off Odion's Battle City tournament deck with the Popsis cards, which I think is a fantastic sort of idea from YuGiOh to sort of retrain these cards and make them more modern. Gives players that have grown up with the game some nostalgia, and this deck actually is really good. I've been reading through a lot of the cards. Had a really strong debut weekend in some regionals. It won a 700 player regional. Admittedly, there were some Feedsmith cards in this deck, which you can see here, but it also had a really good showing in another tournament, going back to the sort of origin as a sort of control deck with a lot more trap cards. But I'll sort of talk about these decks separately. But yeah, just sort of kind of give you guys a spotlight for this new deck. Not everyone is familiar with these cards or has took the opportunity to read them, but I kind of wanted just to go over them and sort of analyze like how are these cards faring up against like other titans like YuGiOh, Malice. But yeah, I think it's amazing that it drew inspiration from Odion's Battle City deck. Obviously, the deck is central around Temple of the Kings, which is a very old card. Essentially, this allows you to activate traps at the same turn in the set. And obviously, the synergy with the new cards allow you to set these trap-like monsters straight from the deck and use them the same turn. And they act as sort of like Omni Negates and Disruption. So yeah, you can combine these with very old cards like Statue of Anguish Pattern. This is a Duel Links card. I played a little bit of Duel Links back in the day. This card was phenomenal there. So yeah, you can utilize really good strong link monsters in later sets, such as Silhouette Rabbit, that can literally just set these cards straight from your deck. So loads of really good synergy here. And yeah, the main monsters in the deck have really good, all sorts of search for themselves. And they also have additional effects to set these cards from deck, as well as having a very good inherent grind game with the Anubis that can literally just shuffle these guys back into the deck, or place them on the bottom of the deck to then special summon it. So yeah, the deck is really interesting, has a lot of space for non-engine, as you can see. But yeah, a really cool concept where you can sort of spread your disruptions across the board, whether they're from hand, back row, or field, such as SP Little Knight as well. And also the person who topped the regional in, I believe it's, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, but I believe it was in Israel, played a really cool combo where you can summon Galite Granite, which searches for Lords of the Heavenly Prison, which is a phenomenal card for a deck like this. For those not familiar with this card, essentially you can reveal it in your hand, and while it's revealed, I believe it stays revealed until the end of the next turn, I believe, or end of the opponent's turn. Your back row cannot be destroyed. So, and then when you activate it from hand, you can when you activate a spell trap, you can special summon it, and it can set a spell or trap, any spell or trap from deck. So you can do really cool things, like Imperial Iron Wall, which is a very crazy card, especially against Malice as well. So yeah, really format specific text you can use for this. Obviously, D-Barrier and different dimensional grounds was used on this deck list. But yeah, I just thought I'd sort of highlight the deck, talk about its pros and cons. So that's just like a summary of how the deck works, really. You've got quite a few starters that all search themselves, and the cards have bonus effects to set these cards from deck. And you can utilize cards like Galite Granite to search for your Lord of the Heavenly Prison, and you can just inherently go into Silhouette Rabbit, which is a generic link to two effect monsters, and it can essentially just set a back row from deck and be Disruption as well. And it has a ton of non-engine, while also utilizing cards like Small World. So I haven't really talked about this card. So Small World is absolutely insane in this deck because you can bridge essentially any hand trap into your Man with a Mark. So let's say we open a common hand would be, I mean, it's not necessarily common, but a probable hand could be one Small World and one Ash Blossom. For those that are not familiar with Small World, it can be quite a daunting card to read for a new player, but essentially all you have to do is reveal one monster in your hand and then choose one monster from your deck that has just one attribute, one of the exact same type, attribute, level, attack, or defense. You banish the one from your hand, banish the one from your deck, and then the one from deck, and it has to match again, type, level, etc. of the monster you want to add. So it's just like you kind of like bridge 3 cards together, really. It can get quite confusing if you're a new player sort of to read these cards, but essentially you can activate Small World, reveal Ash Blossom in your hands. Ash Blossom can then choose Effect Veiler from deck because it has 0 attack. Effect Veiler can then link itself into Man with a Mark because it's a spellcaster. And yeah, essentially this Small World can bridge you in turn your non-engine, your redundant non-engine or redundant engine into a follow-up, or can turn into hand traps itself. So yeah, really, really cool idea. Like if you have an Effect Veiler, you can turn that into Anubis, and then Anubis can search Man with the Mark. I mean, Anubis can kind of search everything anyway, but yeah, you can just turn redundant hand traps into engine, which I think is a really, really cool idea. But yeah, let's sort of like talk about the pros. So I think the deck is like fairly consistent. This version here played 43 cards. There is a version with the Fiendsmith cards, which I think is probably the better way to play it. It has a really, really good synergy. For those that are aware, Necroquip has the bonus effect where if you activate a card from hand to the grave, or if a card is activated, you can draw a card. Anubis can send itself from hand to grave to draw a card. So yeah, you can trigger the effect of Necroquip inherently just with Anubis. So a lot of really cool synergy here. And of course, Desiree is just phenomenal for any sort of board to end on, really. As well as the follow-up, the Fiendsmith deck sort of gives any strategy. But if you want to kind of look at this deck in the pure form, I think it's more than playable, and it's fairly consistent. Anubis, like I said, Man the Mark, and your Treasures the King all sort of branch into each other. And if you utilize cards like Small Worlds, I think for a trap deck, it's pretty consistent. I think the deck kind of falls between trap and mid-range. Really like thin barrier between the two, if I'm talking about this deck. So yeah, I think the deck's somewhat consistent. It's also very versatile. You can kind of adjust your end board depending on what the matchup is. A card that's really versatile is Time Feed through Redoer. And you can also overlay your your trap monsters, to get the broken effect of this guy, which is to place quick effect to place one face-up card your opponent controls to the top of the deck. So yeah, the fact you can get the broken effect of this guy without RNG or variance getting a trap off your opponent's top of the deck. So yeah, another pro would be how versatile this deck is, and it's quite resilient as well. I mean, if your opponent starts throwing hand traps at you, and you're playing the trap deck, you can literally just set 2 or 3 and pass. So I think it has some resilience to hand traps, considering it's supposed to be a mid-range deck and a control deck. It's pretty resilient. So yeah, like I said, you can also play like a lot of non-engine as well to compensate in these sort of mini hand trap walls you might find yourself playing in certain matchups. But some of the cons, I think, it's very sort of set up on, it's dependent on its setup to win games. Like I said, it can play hand trap walls and be somewhat resilient, but sometimes it can be quite lackluster in sort of heavy engine matchups where you're playing against like a deck that has really strong engine. It can kind of push through balls naturally, and push through back row naturally is really dependent on getting that perfect setup. Especially so if you have let's say, for example, you can do the combo to search for Lord of the Heavenly Prison, and then you have the Temple of Kings. You can set a card off this and activate it straight away because of Temple of the Kings. If you can't really get to that setup, you might find yourself falling behind a bit. But yeah, other than that, I think the deck's pretty solid. But another con that could be is going second. I think every sort of control deck struggles going second. So I wouldn't necessarily say this is like an issue with the deck, but I think this is maybe just an issue with YuGiOh, to be honest. But you can kind of compensate from that with the hand traps. So yeah, only like 2 cons I can really think of, being that it's quite dependent on its setup sometimes to win certain matchups, and going second, which I can probably say they're quite generic cons, to be fair, across the board. So if we kind of talk about specific matchups here, so how does this deck sort of position in the current format? Let's take into consideration Ryziel and Malice are the best 2 decks. So if we kind of talk about Ryziel, I think that matchup is quite tough for this deck in particular because of the trap monsters, especially when you go second. But again, that's not really down to like the deck being bad. I think a lot of decks really struggle against Detonator going second. Maybe you could sort of like take a more approach where you focus on Detonator, because obviously it can just remove Treasure of the Kings on activation. It can remove obviously the monster traps. So yeah, and also it can summon Baguska, which can kind of shut off Man in the Mark. Yeah, I mean, on the flip side, this deck can utilize these searchable traps like Dimension Barrier. So going first, you do have a significant edge. The fact you can literally just search these blowout cards against YuGiOh. But I think over a best of 3 set against YuGiOh, I think this deck has a really good chance to beat it. Not to mention if you do set up against YuGiOh going first without like using any of these blowout cards, naturally this card, Statue of Anguish pattern, is kind of strong against YuGiOh and Malice as well, to be fair. It's a non-once per turn destroy card. So removal against these sort of XYZ decks, Link decks, is a really good, really strong tool, in fact. Let's say if you play something like Branded, where like spot removal isn't that good, then this card could be redundant and potentially signed it out. But I think a lot of decks in the format rely on keeping monsters on the field to climb, to summon the boss monsters from the extra deck. Having something like a tool like this in the deck inherently that can be searched is a really strong tool. But yeah, I think in a nutshell, I think the YuGiOh match probably is it's winnable, but it's you just got to focus on getting rid of that Detonator, and perhaps maybe building the deck more optimally to sort of focus on dealing with Detonator, using cards like Ultimate Slayer, Metatronus, Triple Tactics Talent. So yeah, really interesting matchup. And the fact is, it's had a really strong debut weekend. I think this deck can definitely compete with the YuGiOh. But Malice, I think the same sort of points where I mentioned this card can utilize these blowout cards like Imperial Iron Wall, kind of speaks for itself. I think it does give you a really good matchup into that deck, just inherently by just having a searchable way to do this. Again, it does rely on a setup, so it does rely on you kind of going uninterrupted. So maybe it's dependent on your win percentage will go up with a dice roll, but again, that's kind of just YuGiOh's theme right now. If you win a dice roll, you do have an edge to win that best of 3 set. But in sort of conclusion, I think this deck is a really good pickup from the Maze Master set. I'm not too sure, I wasn't too sure on the set, to be fair. It's a set to me that doesn't really, I wouldn't buy it personally. I wouldn't buy the set, but I think it could be a really refreshing and competitive approach to the format that could be really, really fun to play, especially for someone like me. I played Yu-Gi-Oh since I was growing up, so seeing some of these cards retrained to be more modern and be more efficient, it's just a great idea, and I'm all for it, to be fair. So if you guys are looking for a fresh approach to Yu-Gi-Oh, I highly suggest you look into these cards, maybe do some research, and if you like it a lot, maybe look into picking the cards up. But yeah, I think this deck can compete. I think it's challenged, of course, with the presence of YuGiOh in particular, especially going seconds. But I think it can be really versatile into other matchups, somewhat resilient, and yeah, has really good tools. So yeah, just like a summary video for you guys. I hope you guys found some value from the video. I'd be really curious to see what people's thoughts are in the comments. So comment down below, subscribe. I've got some really cool ideas for content over the next couple of weeks, so make sure you stay tuned, as well as some gameplay from my locals. So peace out.